We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Tower cleared.
Here we got a roll program. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
This is Event Horizon, and I am your host, Mark Anthony Peterson. This is the podcast that takes a walk into the paranormal with a splash of conspiracy. This is the podcast that would be born if David Icke and the X-Files had a baby. Guys, welcome to episode 83. This is a monumental episode because of a couple of reasons. One, it marks the beginning of the third chapter in this podcast. The third chapter will focus exclusively on conspiracy theories. Why? Because in the first chapter, we talked about good. In the second chapter, we talked about evil. And whenever you have good and evil, inevitably there will be conspiracies. And the very first one we're going to talk about in today's podcast is the moon landing. I spent an hour talking with Bart Sibrel, the man who wrote and directed A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon and Astronauts Gone Wild. For those of you who are younger enough to remember, he is the man that was punched in the face by Buzz Aldrin when he asked him to put his hand on a Bible and swear that he went to the moon. He did not. He put a Bible in front of Neil Armstrong and got the same response. And so today, we're going to play that interview for you and let you make your own mind up. Now, in the middle of it, we're going to also get a little bit of a sermon, like I always do, except for this time, it's from Mr. Sibrel. He will charge your soul with a mission and give you the ammunition straight from the Bible as to why you've got to stand up for your convictions. Now, before we do any of that, you know what I have to do. Yeah, I got to give you the disclaimer. I am not a religious expert. Far from it. I've been thrown out of more churches than I've been welcomed into. I'm not a physicist, theoretical or otherwise, but I did go to a Holiday Inn Express, slept there too, and I think that gives me the right to do a little research, apply first principles, and come back here and share with you what I've learned. Now, in this case, I read the book Moon Man. That's a memoir from Mr. Bart Sibrel about his life in fighting this mission to prove to the rest of the world that we never landed on the moon. Read it cover to cover. Recommend it to you. And all of that will be in the show notes. This 1 hour interview is what I've brought back, because I applied the first principles to everything he said in the book And guys, it all stands up. So, you got a chance right now to hit stop. And to avoid having your world rocked. Or like Morpheus, that's who I am right now. Giving you the red pill or the green pill. And letting you choose how far down the rabbit hole you're going to go. All I'm offering is the truth. So with that said, here's that interview. You make the choice. Red pill or green pill. Welcome back to Event Horizon Podcast. Guys, I have the honor of interviewing Mr. Bart Sibrel. And for the few of you who don't know who he is, let me take a minute to introduce him. He's an award-winning filmmaker, writer, and investigative journalist. He's been producing TV shows and documentaries for over 35 years. He's worked at 2 of the 3 major networks and produced segments for ABC, CBS, NBC, and CNN. Articles featuring Mr. Sibrel have been published in the New York Times, USA Today, The Washington Post, and Time Magazine. Mr. Sibrel has received the Best Cinematography, Best Editing, and Top 10 Director Awards from the American Motion Picture Society. He is known for a couple of very powerful and impactful documentaries. One called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon from 2001, and Astronauts Gone Wild, an investigation into the authenticity of the moon landing from 2004. He's the author of the books Moon Man, The True Story of a Filmmaker on the CIA Hit List, and Aliens from Planet X, The Origin and Future Appearance. In his memoir, Moon Man, he names 15 government officials, including a president, who was in attendance at a secret military base where the moon landings took or were where they were faked. Mr. Sibrel, thank you for being on the podcast, and thank you for bringing truth to light. My first question, why would NASA, with the government's blessing, fake the July 20th, 1969 moon landing?
Well, I may be saying this for the first time, but it's the way you phrased the question pricked my mind. I don't really think it was NASA who came up with the scheme to fake the moon landing in and of itself. Now, they were kind of like maybe a bishop or a rook in chess, but they weren't really the ones supervising the faking of the moon landing. That was the Pentagon, the CIA, and if there was any branch of the military under them, it was the United States Air Force. And then NASA was basically forced, you could say, or pressured to cooperate, and they did to keep funding coming in. Your podcast is called The Event Horizon, and that's a unique title. There's something similar terminology called paradigm shift, where hundreds of years ago, people thought the Earth was the center of the universe. The sun was the third heavenly body out. And then, not exactly overnight, but in the long scheme of history, overnight, it changed. And it would be surely would be great if people suddenly realized they really did fake the moon landing that I had to go through, and I'm sure you had to go through too. Everybody grew up believing. There were a few people at the time who thought it was fake, but most people thought it was real, and then if they had an open mind, gradually began to realize if they can't go today, how could they go then? So yeah, this is one of those sad things that they did fake, and what can you do? Maybe the event horizon, the paradigm shift is on the horizon. That would be nice. It does seem like that could happen. And if it does, that would be a great moment in history for mankind, because really the faking of the moon landing is so much more profound than if they had actually gone. I mean, if you consider either they went, planted a flag, came back, boy, I can't believe we survived, that was a close one, or the government that is the most powerful in the world faked the greatest accomplishment of mankind, printed it on coins and stamps to add realism to it, and gave these guys medals of honor for being such good liars, and murdered people to cover it up and embezzled billions of dollars. If that's true, which it is, you see, that's so much more profound. It really tells you more about human nature and mankind and governments. And when you realize that is true, and yet it's not officially known, then it's like having a cure for cancer that's being suppressed. We have this great truth that the government is so much more corrupt than we first thought, and spiritual implications of the modern day Tower of Babel putting a man on the moon, and it also never being completed. You see, like the ship that God himself could not sink, which is what they said about the Titanic, and Nixon saying when he knew they weren't on the moon, putting a man on the moon is second in greatness only to God making the universe. So it's really a spiritually blasphemous event. And there is good versus evil, and that kind of surfaces first in truth versus lies, because people who are doing the evil lie to cover it up. So that's the state of affairs. I wish it was differently, but it's better to know that you have cancer than to not know.
Right. And that's the thing that I am puzzled by. When President Kennedy threw the gauntlet down and said, we want to put a man on the moon, at some point they realized it could not happen, and they were at a fork in the road. Admit that, and then just move forward with history, or plan this new divisive route to take the entire world down and continue to roll that snowball of lies forward for tens of years, knowing at some point they'd have to face a reality. It takes a pretty crooked mind to not think that that lie at some point is going to come unravel. But they had to see a benefit from that lie to take the risk to do what they did.
Yeah, it definitely was a risk to fake it. It was a greater risk to force a deadline that would have killed the people on national TV. They should have just admitted they couldn't have done it and asked for more time. But that's what honest people would do. Now, in piloting terms, there's a phrase called the point of no return. So if I'm leaving LA flying to Hawaii, at the halfway point of fuel, I'm committed to going forward if there's a problem and I have to coast, to a crash landing in the ocean or on another island. And up until, the fuel gauge is above halfway, I can always U-turn and go back to LA. At some point, there was the point of no return for the United States government. It appears to be when they killed Kennedy, but it could have happened before then, and it's hard to tell. If you believe, and I gather from your podcast, in the spiritual implications of what's going on in the world, about 7 years ago, which is a biblical number, there was an eclipse in America in 2017 that fell over the tallest pagan sculpture in America, the goddess Athena. So tall that in the hand of the statue is a statue of a 6-foot tall man. And the government spent a lot of money painting that huge statue with 18 karat gold. And so that's where the first eclipse fell. And then just last month, right, it fell over Dallas, Texas. You see, I believe the point of no return, when they killed their own president. And Bobby Kennedy Jr., who probably has more access to the JFK files than Oliver Stone does, it's his researched opinion with 100% certainty that his uncle was killed by the CIA because he was going to shut down that corrupt agency. And then Robert McNamara, who was defense secretary during the Vietnam War, which Kennedy canceled. And when Johnson took over, he immediately reinstated the war, but the public was against it. So the defense secretary